Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by Ella Massal, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Marie, your host for the day. I'm no parent, but I have witnessed friends and family experiencing the new parent's ordeal, and it always seems like there's constant transitioning when an infant is involved. One in particular we'll be discussing today being solid foods. The transition to solid foods can be both exciting and daunting. It marks the beginning of being able to share food with your child. So it's not just a physical experience, but an emotional one as well. That being said, there are several considerations to be made before diving right in. So, in this episode, we will be discussing the essential nutrients found in solid foods and exploring guidelines on introducing solids, when to start, what foods to offer, and how to handle common challenges as well. And guiding us through this today is nutrition education consultant Rachel Schichtl. Prior to her consultancy practice, she spent time as a dietetics professor at the University of Central Arkansas. So it is such a delight having her here. Hi, Rachel. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. How are you going today?
I'm doing good.
That's good to hear. So, before we begin, I am really curious to know what are the most common missteps that parents make regarding nutrition within the infant's first year, especially?
Yeah, I think that parents, like you said, are really excited to get this process started. And so they read all the books and they do all the things and watch all the videos. And if something doesn't go just exactly how they think it's going to go, they get very frustrated. And so I think that there's this level of just expectation of how things are going to go. And I think we don't need to have that expectation because every child is different and every situation's different, every personality is different. And so I think just having that really, really rigid set of this is how I'm going to do things and this is exactly how I'm going to offer foods and my child's just going to, take on to it immediately. I think that that's probably not the best way to kind of ease our babies into eating solid food.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It sounds like a whirlwind of emotions because on one hand you want to do everything right, and on the other hand, every infant is different, and it's really difficult to tell. But before we go any further into detail, I would love to get to know you better. This is Have You Met Rachel? And my first question for you is, what do you like to do in your spare time?
So I have three kids of my own, and so I spend a lot of time with them and doing all sorts of things. We live in the country and we have kind of a small hobby farm, so we have orchards and gardens and chickens and all the things to kind of keep us busy. And actually, I just got finished today. I put up some muscadine jelly, which is kind of the United States version of grapes. We have a variety called muscadines, but just a lovely grape variety that we grow. And I made jelly. And so I just love to cook and can and do all those sorts of kind of things around the homestead.
That's amazing. It sounds like a lot of work though.
Yeah, so it can be, but it can be fun. And so, just doing a few little things here and there every day and having the kids help and, finding things that you enjoy doing is good.
That sounds so nice. It is like such a dream for me. I feel like it's one of those things that I always dream of wanting to have or wanting to do, wanting to dedicate my life to. But as someone who grew up in the city, it's like it just sounds like so much work. Like you manning the chickens? Like, what's the upkeep like with the chickens?
So thankfully, all my kids are really into the chickens and they love the chickens. And so we have probably about 40 right now. We have 20 larger breeds and then 20 of, we call them bantam breeds, which is the smaller breeds of poultry that are super cute and have fuzzy feet and lots of cute little tail feathers. They have tiny eggs. But so my son is responsible for feeding and watering and gathering the eggs there. So yeah, it doesn't take much of my time and it really doesn't take much of his time. Just letting them out in the morning, putting them up at night, and then making sure their feed and water are good.
Oh, that's really nice. So apart from the homestead, what other hobbies do you have? Do you read books or TV or watch TV shows or movies?
Yeah, so I like to read. I'm always reading whatever John Grisham has came out with. I just finished Camino Ghost, I think is his latest ones. I also like to read autobiographies and biographical books. I just finished the Britney Spears autobiography, The Woman in Me. I grew up listening to her, so that was interesting. So yeah, I like to read and I like to cook and bake and just do lots of cozy little things like that.
Ooh, cooking and baking. So, do you have any signature recipes?
Yeah, no, probably not. Um, so tonight we had just, I call it a sheet pan dinner, but we had sweet potatoes, regular white potatoes with onions and bell peppers on a sheet pan with some, seasoned chicken breasts. And that's what we had for dinner. You just put everything in the oven and cook it at once. And oh, yeah, we eat a lot of sweet potatoes and carrots like that cooked in the oven just on a sheet pan.
Yeah, sheet pan dinners are underrated, I reckon, because like
Yes.
using the oven, you can multitask in using the oven so much. You just like have five different sheet pans, and you can cook like various vegetables and whatnot in various sheet pans, and just take them out at any time. But what are some of your favorite dishes to make apart from sheet pan dinner?
Hmm. I make a strawberry cake that everyone really likes around the holidays. Everyone asks me to bring that. We have some apple trees here, and I'm always making apple cobblers or some sort of fruit cobbler with like an oat crumble topping. I make really good chili. We have we're my husband and son hunt quite a bit, so we always have a lot of venison or deer meat. So making things with that. Yeah, so just lots of different
Oh.
things.
That's really interesting. What does deer meat taste like? I've never had it.
Okay. So to me, it has the consistency of ground beef. A lot of people say it's gamey, like has a little gamier flavor, which it probably does. But really, that's all we eat. We have deer, and it's a good lean source of protein, and it's very versatile. And so we just eat a lot of deer meat in our house. But yeah, you use it just like you would ground beef. You put it in tacos, you can put it on pizzas and soups and stews, all sorts of things.
Interesting. It sounds like a mix between beef and lamb.
Probably, yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. My last question for you before we head into our discussion about solid foods is, what is your definition of parenting?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I think that parents just are the ones that guide their children as they're growing. They're responsible, of course, for the day-to-day type things, keeping them clean, keeping them fed, keeping them, on task, but also just giving them freedom, giving them discipline, giving them guidance, giving them advice, and really just the ones that are responsible for kind of allowing that independence as they get older and then eventually kind of, letting them leave the nest, but just that guidance and discipline and support as they kind of come into their own person.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it's not just biological, it's also emotional as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Now let's talk about solid foods in infant nutrition. What is the importance of nutrition during infancy, and what is that impact on their health and development?
Mm-hmm. So, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends breastfeeding up until the child's at least a year old, and the World Health Organization even says up to 2 years, but they want you to start including complementary or solid foods around the age of 6 months. And so the nutrition still is primarily going to come from either the fortified infant formula or the breast milk during that time. But adding some of those foods kind of has a couple different things that it's doing, a couple different benefits. One is it's teaching socially how kids can interact during the dinner table, how they're going to interact with their families. It has some oral issues related to speech that will help with their speech and development when they start to learn how to eat off of a spoon. It starts to allow their palate to expand, so they get different flavors. They start to get different preferences. And it's a good way to help with some of their fine motor skills as they start to use their spoon or as they start to finger food with their little pincher grasps, pick up food from their plate. So nutritionally, they're still getting what they need from either breast milk or formula, but you're really starting to give them this exploration of food that's going to, really bleed over into their toddler years as they're really starting to eat. And so some of those first food experiences, are really important. And kids like to, babies, infants, once they're able to start eating, they like to eat what their family's eating. They like to be included in that social time and sitting at the table, and they start to get curious about what others are eating. And so it's just a great training tool to help them start getting some of those textures and flavors in.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I never realized that introducing solid foods to an infant was more about the motor skills and all the other developmental stages than solely nutrition itself. So what developmental milestones should parents look out for when deciding when to introduce solid foods?
Yeah, so I think that's kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier. I think sometimes parents just get so overwhelmed with following such a strict schedule. But some things to look for in your baby are, if you're a parent, are things like, can they sit up unsupported and they can hold their head and their neck up? And that, of course, helps to prevent choking. Are they curious in what their parents or family are eating? Do they kind of look at you when you're eating and kind of give you that creepy stare, like, I want what you're having, right? um, can they do they have that tongue thrust, which they had when they were an infant, which, when they just put their tongue forward and press out that food? Once that starts to subside and they actually do start to take food off of a spoon, that's another kind of sign that they're ready. Yeah, so I think those are the main things, making sure they can sit up unassisted if they're curious, those sorts of things.
Yeah. And is there any real danger or threat at all with waiting a bit longer before introducing solid foods?
Yeah, so I think some of the danger might come with things like I was talking about with the oral motor skills and the speech development, some of those things. But if a parent wants to wait until the baby's 7 months, 8 months, it's going to be okay. I don't think I would delay that much longer unless they had some kind of health concern that, needed that sort of waiting. For example, sometimes babies with Down syndrome have that tongue thrust where they just don't swallow properly and they're always thrusting kind of their tongue out. You may have a baby with a cleft palate that has to wait a little bit longer, or some other concerns. But other than that, you don't have to start the day that they turn 6 months. If you want to wait a little bit, that's okay. But once they start showing signs of really wanting to eat when other people are eating, that's a good indication that they're ready.
Right. And from a nutritional perspective, is there any major change at all with an infant's nutritional needs when transitioning between breast milk and solid foods?
Yeah, so they're still going to need the same kind of caloric intake and protein, fats, carbs. And really, if you think about what you're giving a baby when they're first starting to eat solid food, for example, a tablespoon of green beans, that probably doesn't have 15, 25 calories at best in it. And so that's a lot of pureed green beans for a baby to eat. And they're not getting a lot of calories out of it. So kind of just thinking about that too. You don't want to go all of a sudden breastfeeding or formula, and then now all of a sudden all they're getting is the food, because it does kind of take that transition period. But yeah, as they start eating more food, then they're getting a larger variety of vitamins and minerals and those micronutrients that maybe they didn't have in the breast milk or formula. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It kind of reminds me of, well, this comparison comes from a place of like, I'm more acquainted with cat care than infant care, but it reminds me of transitioning between food brands for cats, because they will get a huge shock. Well, most of them will get a huge shock if you just change overnight the food brand that they get, or what type of food that they get. So sometimes you have to like put a bit of dry food in their wet food if you wanna start feeding them dry food, and then put a little bit more and just do a gradual change. I don't know how
Yeah.
accurate that is, but
No, that's very accurate. So a lot of people, what they will do is one of the first foods they start babies on is a fortified cereal. And so it might be rice or barley or oat cereal. And when they start introducing that to baby, they'll mix it with breast milk or the formula that the baby's used to. So they still kind of have that same flavor. And then they'll introduce the cereal and have the baby eat it for a while, several days. And then they might add a little bit of pureed sweet potato or a little bit of squash or whatever the next food is going to be into that cereal and kind of feed it that way. And so really that's exactly what you're talking about with the kittens. But yeah, it's the same way with infants. And so that also kind of helps to know if there's going to be any food allergies or intolerances. You know, we're not going to start on day one with just a variety of a buffet of food and let them have all the different types. You know, you're going to introduce one food and serve them that food, you know, for maybe 3 to 5 days, and then try another food. And then if they don't have any issues with that, maybe try another food. And so it is a process. You're not just going to overnight all of a sudden start eating all the things.
right. And does that hold true for like the solidity of the food? So you start with like a semi-solid food, like almost like a paste, before moving on to more solid ones?
Yeah. And so I was always just really concerned about my kids choking, which was probably irrational, but I just always was. And so, you know, really, I would just add a little bit of cereal, and it was just a little bit thicker than probably what breast milk would be. And then I might the next time not add as much milk. And then, you know, eventually you get it to a consistency that they're good with. But, you know, at 6 months, you know, they're still learning how to swallow. They're not chewing real well. And so you do have to be careful that it is very pureed still at this point.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Now when it comes to common misconceptions about introducing solid foods to infants, what have you heard in your professional life?
Yeah. So, a couple of things I think that maybe I used to hear more that aren't really what we are seeing in the literature anymore. One thing is that you need to start your baby on some sort of cereal as their first food. So, rice, barley, oats, something like that. And so, used to, that's what everyone said, is that their first food should absolutely be like a barley cereal. And I don't think that's true anymore. I think that the American Academy of Pediatrics and the CDC kind of allow that, you know, the first food could be a fruit, it could be a veggie, it could be a cereal. It doesn't necessarily have to be a cereal. And so I think that's a misconception. You know, people always think they have to start with cereal. I think another misconception that I do see and hear a lot, and sometimes, you know, grandma said to do it, or sometimes someone's sister did it and it worked for them, putting rice cereal in bottles. So there's really no indication that that helps babies sleep better, or, you know, helps them go longer in between naps. I know anecdotally someone may say, oh, it helped my baby sleep better, sleep through the night, but there's really no research that says that.
Mhm.
And it also kind of is a bad habit to start putting other things besides milk or
Mhm.
formula into a bottle. And so I always talk with parents about the only thing that goes into a bottle is milk, breast milk or formula, no juice, nothing like that. There's some other issues too with like dental cavities and dental caries and things like that that can happen. But yeah, just don't put rice cereal in bottles. It's not going to help.
Right, that's interesting. So what is the issue with putting other things inside a milk bottle?
Yeah, so one of the things is that it just doesn't promote that oral development. Think about the muscles and the what are you using when you're sucking a bottle versus what are you using when you are using a spoon or someone's using a spoon to feed you. So, with your mouth, your lips, the way that you swallow. And then also, when a baby's drinking a bottle and that little plastic nipple stays in their mouth and that liquid, especially like juice that has a lot of carbohydrates and sugars in it, are just sitting on their teeth. That's not good for them once they start to get teeth, especially. So, yeah, just nothing in your bottle, but formula, breast milk.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And when it comes to allergies or picky eating, how should parents address these challenges?
Yeah, so if you know your child has an allergy, your baby has an allergy, which some of the more common ones in babies are milk, eggs, wheat, soy, tree nuts, and peanuts. Those are some of the more common ones. If you know that, I think you just have to really be an advocate for your baby. Let grandma and grandpa and everyone know that this is what is going on. These are the foods that are expected. Pack your own, food when you go places. Really be careful about looking at labels. And so this is when they're a little bit older, of course, you have to be aware, but I'm just being an advocate and really making sure everyone knows what's going on. And as a child gets older, of course, you can train them as well to kind of be their own advocate and to look at things. But, picky eaters are interesting because I really go back to when they are about 6 months old and parents do start giving them food. Really be creative in what you give them. Here in America, I think a lot of people start out with things like green beans, squash, sweet potatoes, and all of those are great. But, you can expand a little bit and maybe try mango or different fruits, peaches, pineapples, kiwi. Of course, we're pureeing them still and making sure they're proper consistency, but giving them lots of options as babies and not just sticking to green beans every day as their solid food. I think that expands their palates. I think that it allows them a chance to get to know some of their taste preferences better. So I would really encourage parents to do that once they have kind of an established solid eater on their hands, to give them some more exotic type flavors that they
Mhm.
might be interested in, just so that we can prevent some of that pickiness as they get older.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think it also like helps them get acquainted at least with a variety of textures and flavor profiles, and at the very least they will know what they like and what they don't like. Actually more about like the parents as well. At the very least they will know like especially if they're a picky eater, it makes all the more sense to like introduce other flavors to them and other types of fruits and foods. Because you'll never know if you keep sticking to green beans and squash and pumpkin, I suppose. But what would you say are the essential food groups to focus on when it comes to infant's diet during their first year?
Yeah, so the types of food, of course, are fats, carbs, and protein that babies will need. But as far as the food groups, there's fruits, and there's vegetables, and there's protein, which of course could be meat, but if they're vegetarian, following a vegetarian diet, it could be other things as well. You can introduce them to eggs. Yogurt, even though babies aren't supposed to have cow's milk until they're 12 months old, they can have some yogurt. And so that might be a good option for some protein for babies. And then grains, especially whole grains, that you can start getting them used to, and try to stay away from some of those simple carbohydrates that, we get used to as we get older. But, when they're young, giving them a variety of grains. I've mentioned before already, but barley, oats, different whole grains, rice, some of those type of things that they might want to eat. Yeah.
Yeah, and what advice do you have for parents when it comes to keeping track of their infant's diet and ensuring that they're receiving a balanced diet?
Yes, that's a very good question, because I think sometimes parents do get worried about that. Is my baby growing enough? Are they, gaining enough weight? Are they getting tall? All of those things are concern. And so one of the things I really like when you go to the pediatrician is to use the, infant growth charts. And so if you have a baby at all, you know what I'm talking about. But every time they go, they kind of track the growth and development for height, weight, head circumference, and then height for weight on a little growth curve. And so they can see if the baby is growing over time and in a way that they need to be growing. Are they going too much? Has there been a little dip? Very quickly, you can look visually at this growth chart and see that something's going on. So that's a good way for parents to kind of keep a check on what's going on. Also, being mindful of babies' diapering. So do they have wet diapers throughout the day? Are they going to the bathroom, number 2, on a consistent basis? Do they seem constipated? Are they very fussy? Are they gassy? Is their stool really hard? Is it hard for them to pass it? Those sorts of things might have you to take pause and start to think about what are some other things that I could be doing in their diet that, make sure they're getting what they need. But you probably will see in that transition from only breast milk or only formula into some solid foods, there will be some changes in their stool just because they're getting different kinds of food. And so you might see that it may have a different color, or it may have a little different, texture or consistency. But as long as it's not, diarrhea constantly, or as long as it's not, hard when they're passing stool and they're constipated, that's a good indicator as well.
Okay, so that's really good information to know that a change in the excretion is completely normal. But I just imagine that for parents, it must be a really anxiety-inducing time, thinking like, oh, all of a sudden there's this change and I'm not familiar with it. Am I doing something wrong? So, what advice do you have for experiencing that whirlwind of emotions?
Yeah. So I think that it's important to have some support. So whether it's your pediatrician, your nurse, however it is that you kind of make sure that your baby is being followed, making sure that they're growing. So if baby's growing, we know we're doing something right. Making sure that they're having, dirty diapers, that, we want them to be urinating because that means they're not dehydrated. We want them to be going to the bathroom because that means that they have that excess that they can kind of excrete. As long as they're not constipated. Are they happy? How's their personality? Sometimes babies, when they're getting different food, they might be a little gassy or a little colicky or have some of that dissension, but we don't want that to last for very long. So just know that there will be some changes that happen. But, you have some great intuition as a parent, and if this is something that may be just a tweak because baby's eating a new food, or if it's something you need to be a little more concerned about.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. There are also some sources and studies that vouch for this responsive feeding approach, which I wanted to ask you about today. It's this feeding style whereby parents are to follow their infant's cues, only feeding them when they are hungry rather than at specific premeditated intervals. So, what are your thoughts on this approach?
Yeah, so I think it works for some babies and some babies not. So I had a baby she was just really sleepy, quite frankly, all the time. And so I just thought, oh, I have a jackpot of a baby. She sleeps a lot. That's great. Um, And I would have to wake her up to nurse her because she just wouldn't wake up. And so she was losing weight and all of these things. And so I really had to make her wake up to nurse. And so this was when she was a little bit smaller. But as they get older, I do think that as parents, you need to be responsive to when they're hungry and know that there are going to be days that a 6-month-old may not eat a whole lot. And there's going to be days that they're going to be a little hungrier and they may want, several spoonfuls of whatever it is that you're giving them. And so I think that when we get into an adult, we really call it intuitive eating, mindful eating. And so we don't want to eat more than we need. We don't want to eat when we're not hungry. We don't want to eat out of boredom. We don't want to eat just because it's time to eat as an adult. And so I think some of that can be transferred into, the infant and the baby as well. But we do need to make sure that they're eating because some babies just haven't developed those cues yet until they get a little bit older. So monitoring that they are eating enough, but also know that there may be times that they do need to eat a little bit more and they are a little hungrier.
Right. So, what are some examples of hunger and fullness cues that an infant might display?
So, especially when they're nursing or taking a bottle, when they start to stop in between sucks or gulps, and maybe they move their head to the side or they stop to take deep breaths, when they're eating table food or solid food, the same sort of things. When they start to turn their head away, when you put the spoon towards their face, they're kind of telling you they're full or they don't want any more. Of course, sometimes they get tired. We've all seen those cute little videos on social media where babies are like eating spaghetti and it's all over their face and they're like passed out. But, they get tired too. And so it can be an ordeal with them sitting up in a high chair and being social and eating their food. And so once they start to get tired as well. So looking at those cues when they're really small, they may start sucking on their fist or, being fussy, those sorts of things until they can kind of communicate a bit more of what they want.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's very, very good information to have on hand. Now let's talk about practices and habits. What do you think is a habit that would be good for parents to practice when incorporating solid foods into their infant's diet?
I think as much as possible, it's a really great practice to have babies sit with you at the table. We know that as kids get older, it's very beneficial to have what we call the family table and have family meal times together, but it can start when they're littler. And so, of course, that doesn't work if baby goes to bed at 7 and the rest of the family doesn't have dinner until, 8:30 or something. But anytime that it's appropriate, have the baby sit with you and have your plate and your cup and then let them have their plate. And if it's appropriate, whatever you're eating, they can eat as well. So when my kids were little, we would just blend up the things we were eating and allow them to eat it as well. Once they get to be 8 or 9 months and start to kind of finger food, feed themselves, they can pick up things from their plate, give them little tiny bites. Again, I was always a little nervous about choking, but make sure everything's cut up into tiny little bites for them. But I think that they like to be in that social environment and it just kind of teaches them good habits. So that's a great practice, even if it's just one meal a day, if it doesn't work out with everyone's schedule. But as often as you can have that communal type meal together, I think it's just showing them good mealtime habits.
Yeah, I always loved when babies show that like social aspect of themselves, of, like wanting to be around. It's so adorable because this tiny little human wants to be among these what must seem like giants to them.
Yes. Yeah, they
So
want to be there
yeah,
with you. You're laughing and having fun, enjoying your food, and they want to do that too.
yeah. Well, are there any challenges though to trying to do this practice?
Yeah, so it can be challenging. I already mentioned about scheduling. Babies go to bed early sometimes, they nap, they may be napping during, lunchtime with the rest of the family. And so that could be a challenge. It may be that they're not eating the same things that you're eating. And so then you either have to, warm up something different for them
Mhm,
or have a different meal for them if you're out and about,
mhm,
packing something that they can have.
mhm,
So that can be a little bit of a challenge. And then it can be quite messy, but I think that that's part of it as well. Just they're exploring their hands and their mouths and what do I do with this, and giving them a utensil even before they probably are going to use it properly, I think is just a good way to help them kind of learn how to hold a spoon. Maybe you guide them as to, picking it up off their plate and put it in their mouth, and they'll learn eventually. But do not expect that this is going to be clean 100% of the time. There's going to have to be baths involved. There's going to be messy high chairs for quite some time when you first start feeding babies.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's like with almost anything that we do, we kind of have to, even as adults, we have to make mistakes before we perfect some skill. Yeah. So it totally makes sense. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's been so enlightening. I love talking to you and learning more from you. Now let's move on to the open mic section, and this is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about. It doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is yours. Take it away.
Oh, that's a good yeah, something I'm passionate about. So, I mean, in my career, I've done a lot of work with what I call food access. And so a lot of my work has been around things like access to healthy foods, access to farmers markets, social determinants of health. A lot of my earlier research work was around school gardens and community gardens. And so I think that as a dietitian and those working in nutrition, a lot of times we just say, oh, you should eat better food, which is probably true. But we have to think about, do they have transportation? Do they have access to that healthy food? Do they have a grocery store that they can go and purchase that food at? Do they have money to purchase that food? And so I think it's one thing for us to say, these are the types of food you should eat. But I think also really more of a public health community type of work is there an environment set up that allows people to make better choices? So one of my first research studies I was on many, many years ago, way before GPS or anything like that, we used to have MapQuest, and we would print out directions, like a big pile of directions. It would be on my desk Monday morning. And I would go out into these rural areas and I would drive around and I would look to see if there are gas stations or convenience stores or grocery stores. And I would plot those, and I would actually physically go in and see what they sold and how much they cost. And did they even have an apple? And if they did, how much did it cost? Did they have single serve milk or low fat milk or anything like that? If so, how much did it cost? And so what we found is that, especially in some of these rural areas of Arkansas, people would have to drive quite some time to get an apple or to get, a gallon of fat-free milk. And so again, just kind of my work has really been about the environment that our food is in, and then how to have access to some of those healthier foods. So food insecurity, food desert, some of that work. So that's where I do a lot of my work as well.
That's amazing. And I feel like it's all the more important now than ever before with the rising costs in grocery stores. It's really getting ridiculous. I mean, the prices have skyrocketed.
Yeah, no, I agree. Absolutely. So, I normally, when I talk to people about some budget friendly options, we talk about things like eggs. Eggs are a great source of protein, and you normally can find a sale on those pretty cheap, but even those are getting expensive. And so a lot of what I also like to do is just education on things like budget friendly recipes and budget friendly cooking. And, some of those cooking methods, dried beans, dried peas, lentils, some of those foods can be a little cheaper. You have to know how to cook them, but then they stretch a long way and they have iron and minerals and protein and they last a long time. And so just kind of getting the word out about some of these alternatives in what is a very difficult time for a lot of people and their grocery budgets.
Yeah, that is true. I love cooking with lentils, but I think there's such a learning curve to it, and it always seems so um it always seems very daunting, but it actually really is not. It's very simple once you get to know how to cook it. You just it's similar to how like the way you cook rice, it's not the same way you cook pasta. So you have to like learn how to cook lentils in their own way and pair them with the right things, and you're all set, honestly.
Yeah. And cook a big batch at the beginning of the week and then add it all to things throughout the week. You can put in salads and soups, and we mix it with meat for tacos and all sorts of things. And lentils are great. They kind of take up the flavor of what other foods that you're serving it with. So
Mhm.
yeah, I'm a big fan of dried beans, peas, and lentils. We have a lot, probably an embarrassing amount for my family of 5, but we use them a lot.
Yeah, that's so fair. Yeah, I feel like anyone who is curious about it, or even if you're not curious, should at least try cooking with lentils once, because it's actually pretty easy. And they store really well in the cans and stuff, and they make really good emergency food in case you can't make it to the grocery store. So yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us today. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
So probably the best place is my LinkedIn profile. So it's just Rachel Schichtl, and I think you'll link to that because my last name's a bit peculiar to spell. But yeah, look me up on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with you, and I love to talk about all of these things. I love to talk about access to food. I love to talk about infant nutrition and really nutrition throughout the lifespan. So if you have an interest with that, for sure, look me up.
Amazing. We'll link those in the show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will catch you in the next episode.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by the Parenting Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.